Hi folks, welcome back to part two with myself, Andy Chaplin, Neil Geddes Ward, Dr. Ian Rubenstein, and the Kinsella Cray twins, the psychic craze, as I'm sure they won't mind me saying. You guys have been doing this for many years now. Did you both kind of start? I mean, I know your stories and your kind of like your background with the abductions and things. Remind me again, were you both abducted at the same time? Did you have the same experiences at the same time, or was it very different?
No, I can only recall one that happened in 1989, the winter of 1989. The UFOs, well, obviously, thank goodness they were filmed in 2016. That's in the upcoming book that's coming out, along with other cases, interesting cases. But they happened on two separate occasions and some years apart from one another. If, as I say, it was what we call an abduction, because, you know, I'm very not analytical, but I think that the experience has taught me a lot more about how the phenomenon, the UFO phenomenon, may do what it does, because a lot of people were talking about the very physical nature of the reality. And yet I had gone through one part that was physical and another part that was non-physical. And that was back in the winter of 1989. So going back to what you all stated earlier, and Ian and Neil, Andy, was that this opened up a new paradigm of thought of how these other intelligences may be able to infiltrate our plane of reality, and not the version that we've been sold, i.e. like aliens coming in a ship and landing and reaching out their hand to say we've made contact. It's a very different experience in that level. But in answer to your question, there were two separate experiences. Mine had been very negative, and Ronnie?
Yes, it raises the question of the entities or apparent aliens. From what I saw, was very different. And I would say mine was negative as well, especially what they showed me at the end. A parting gift, as you know, Andy, yourself and Neil very well, the Cheshire Cat. And it's conjured. He was conjured for a reason. It took me 34 years, this hologram, I knew it was a hologram, very smart hologram, in 1982. It was conjured for a reason. And it took me 35 years to finally decipher what exactly that meant. Basically, they tried to make me forget it. So when people talk about being given amnesia, people don't forget. They can't. So they're either stupid, the aliens, they can't nullify the encounter, or they want you to remember it, but they'll try and place a layer over it. So it's ethereal in that sense, if that makes any sense.
I've got to ask this. So what was the meaning behind the Cheshire Cat that you've deciphered?
Basically, to make me look like a complete and utter idiot. When I had seen these things I call the doctors, they weren't the Greys. I didn't understand. I didn't know about UFOs, and I didn't know really aliens. I wasn't interested. I was 13.
We saw the orb with Grandma.
Yes, and it's funny how you try and push that aside. But I would call them the doctors. They were heavily masked. They were uniformed. They were like very heavily masked, disguised in type of radiation outfits, but they looked like gas masks wearing. They were concealed, but they weren't nasty. They weren't unkind, but it was horrific because I wept in front of them. I mean, they were very authoritative, and it was coherent the way it worked. Not in the way people would imagine. It was quite frightening. But the Cheshire Cat, when I was placed back down on the bed, when I came through the roof, dropping from this thing in the sky, he was conjured and he looked like an absolute, as I stated, a nightmare. He puts the interpretation of Lewis Carroll's Cheshire Cat to shame, because this was an utter horror, a horror. And I realized that if I go and see a psychologist afterwards and say I saw the Cheshire Cat, they'll say, "Oh yeah, you're just getting confused with Alice in Wonderland. Right. This is you've gone down the rabbit hole." It's very smart, but it didn't work. I think that was their undoing. In the end, I think that was their undoing. And I've only seen them once. That was then. I don't want you to see them again. It was in 1982.
Do you think these masked people were they humans or were they greys?
I could not. Andy, I couldn't answer that, I'm afraid.
Hang on. I thought I'd turn that on.
know what they were. They were just concealed and being an authority. And they were frightening. But they didn't, I must reiterate, they didn't enforce the fear on me. It's a situation you're in where you're paralyzed to a degree and you're in their power and they are over you. They were, as I said, they were kind, but they were forceful. Documented all this anyway.
So they weren't connected with Philip's previous experience of the little man?
No, this was in 1982. I was 13. So it's and I've never seen them again. And I go back again and again to question my sanity. I go back to question, and it did happen. It did happen. It wasn't a dream, or it wasn't a sleep paralysis. It wasn't an illusion. It actually happened. And this was the nasty thing. This was the nasty thing. Whatever did it knew that I would never talk about it. Or if I did, I would be mocked, as people usually are. So what you do best when you're 13, you keep it quiet. I only first released that incident in a book I had published by Capital Ban called Twin Souls. That was the very first time I'd ever spoken about it, and that was 2012. So because it was so bizarre, but it had to come out. I've picked a time many years later to document this, to actually let people know that these things do happen, albeit you can't understand what they are. I didn't understand what they were.
And Philip, you actually went to your own GP, didn't you? Because you thought you had something like an implant or something that you had to be looked at, was it your ear or something? Or
yes, the right ear, because I had problems. I'm not going to go into the actual events that happened. I suffered on some of the national television programs many years ago, and I realised what a fool I had been, being naive and thinking that people would understand through what they call the abduction or the procedure that was carried out, which people laugh and joke, but I can assure anyone that when you find yourself in that situation, it's anything but pleasant. However, was it negative? Well, I've changed. A lot of things changed for me. And, maybe from their perspective, the way that they, like doctors, it's going to hurt. But in the long term, it's going to lead to more recovery. Now, I did have something in my right ear. I had continuous nosebleeds to the right nostril. Obviously, I felt it difficult to walk. I had 3 triangular red marks that my brother tried to record. Do you remember the old instant Kodak cameras?
Mm-hmm.
There were 3 triangular marks behind my right ear that were very prominent, but it would not turn up in the picture. And I have 3 small dots on my right arm. And I had this problem with my right ear for many years, and I didn't really think much of it until it was really starting to cause a problem. So I went to the GP on several occasions, and it was on the last occasion that really shocked me. And Ian, being a medical doctor, probably would understand. But I went for them to have a look in the ear, and the doctor had a look, and she used the device to have another look. And then she called another doctor down to have a look. And as the other doctor was having a look, she was saying it looks like it's still healing, and it has a crystalline structure to it. Well, what is very bizarre was that they had left it at that. They had literally left it at that. There was nothing that was prescribed. There was no offer to send me to hospital to let an ear specialist have a look in the ear. And when the doctor looked at me, she said to me, just out of the blue, "Have you been abducted by aliens?" I always joke and say that I went back to the car far worse than I went to it. But on one occasion, I'm not saying that this is an implant, but I did feel it move. Whatever it was, it actually physically moved further back in my ear. And I got that as a sign that, okay, I'm going to leave it. This is the 3rd time I've been. And on each occasion, it's almost like it's been left. And I have heard that when people have had what they call a chip removed, they call it the chip, the probe, whatever you want to call it, sometimes in the nose cavity, the ear cavity, even in the leg or arms, covered in a piece of tissue so it's not rejected, but the body doesn't reject it, and to conceal it, is that when it's had been removed, they felt empty. So I think to myself, well, no, I still want my barcode in, just in case it's a direct link to those guys. So is it a probe? Is it a device? I have no idea, but a part of me says yes, because it matches the description of many other people. And then you get people coming out saying, prove it and all this. And I think, well, it's okay, because you stand in the firing line for experiences, and then you get shot down. But it's okay, because, the only person that benefits from this is me, because I've seen them. They've been in my company. I've been in their company, not nice company, but I think I've learned and grown by this experience. And another brilliant researcher, Pierre Sabac, has been working with me and found some parallels towards what happened in 1989 that is quite shocking, that I completely missed.
Wow. So, Ian, as a doctor, you just heard Philip's own experience with his own GP. What would you think if someone came into you with something like that, or what's your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't know what to think, to be honest. I mean, you would wonder, wouldn't you? I'm amazed that your GP asked you that question. Have you been abducted by aliens? It makes you wonder if the implant was extending his influence outwards. Interesting. I think, though, if I saw something that I didn't know was in someone's ear, I would be inclined to refer you to an ENT surgeon, but I don't know. I don't know what to make of it, quite honestly. It's interesting that, Roger Lear, the podiatrician in America who died recently, he used to specialize in taking these implants out. I think he made a point that sometimes when you attempt to do this, they move.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
They would fuse. Some other interesting points. They would fuse with the biological matter around them, and not only that, but when the body, and you know this, Ian, obviously, when the body has a foreign object inside it, the body tries to reject it. But the body was totally kind of like I don't know what the medical term would be. It would kind of accept it and encompass it, and kind of it wouldn't reject it at all, which is really, really interesting. Like if you had a metal shard that went in your skin, the body would try and either kind of, get rid of it somehow, or kind of like have an adverse reaction. But with these implants, they don't do that.
This would show that they know us very well. The doctors who I saw, I call them that, in 82, they evidently know us very well because of what they showed me. So they understand our likes and dislikes. They understand our media, so. And as you're talking about this the body accepting a chip or one of their alleged chips, yes, the body would reject. Anyone would understand that the body would reject anything foreign. But as you said, these seem to stay in there. So these things seem to understand us very well, don't they?
Mm. When the doctor was kind of laughed and said, "Have you been abducted by an alien?" Was the vibration behind that? Were they joking or were they serious?
To be honest with you, it was a very strange comment, and the doctor knows that she knew that I was interested in psychic phenomena, but nothing about my UFO research at all, ever. Mm-hmm. And she wouldn't know that, but it was weird. And when I went back to the car, I felt quite shocked. And it's interesting when you said, and it does, because I do have a sense of humor, and it's not all doom and gloom and sensational. It's just trying to understand what's happened. I got it as like, the invaders. Like when I went back to my car, I thought, well, that's helped me a great deal, isn't it? But I did feel that I was meant to leave it. And people will say, oh, that's a cop-out. No, if it's personal to you and you've gone through that experience, it's a very different ball game altogether than being on the outside of in the other field saying you should do this and you should do that. It's no different from someone that's observed a UFO stating, well, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? Well, at the end of the day, you're going to do exactly what you feel that you need to do. But it did feel very bizarre, and that is the truth of God. I do not lie. And of course, I remember looking incredulous and really shaking, going back to the car thinking, blimey, what do they know?
It's like, as I said, when this happened to myself as well, and this is what got me into it years later, I became bold and started looking into this. It's not what people think. when this happens, when this happened, it is very strange. I mean, we read about it in books and we can understand or see on film, but when you actually experience it, it's entirely different to how you would model it. Do you see what I mean? Like the doctors, it was very peculiar, very weird. I can't express the feelings I had during that time or the horror they showed me afterwards. Very nasty. But it's when this happens to you, it's very strange. They can't, the people, if you write about it, you can't encapsulate the actual feeling of it being so different. Really weird.
Do you still get problems with this implant? I was saying implant, whatever it was. Do you still get issues with it? Is it still there to your knowledge?
It's still there. I mean, it makes me aware that it's still there because I can feel it. And the other thing is that I try to rationalize. I may have a chip in me. I may not. It could be something entirely different. But it's been in there for years, and it happened after I what we would call the abduction back in 1989, or although the experience through the research that I've come up with and working towards the theoretical model of abductions kind of like changes our perception of what we consider to be aliens in that degree. So it's still there, and I just think it's part of me and my friend. I remembered one time I did feel it move, and it shocked me. I'm sure Ian will understand that if I use the word patient, can feel something moving, how shocking that's going to be, because you're thinking, oh my goodness, it's not earwax or anything like that. Sorry to be a bit graphic. It physically moved back into the ear. And I wasn't doing anything that would threaten it, or there was no one touching my ear at the time. I was just laying down having a rest, but it moved back. So I wonder if that, if they were anticipating the doctors having a look at it.
One thing that I do find kind of curious, and I do have a theory behind this. When you see people who have had implants and they've zoomed in on it, they look like pieces of iron, but they're not uniform. They're very irregularly shaped. They're kind of like
bits of dug out the ground.
They look like shards, but they're not kind of perfect shards. They're just kind of like, they look like splinters off an old rusty sword or something.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling of why that is. Could it be to kind of reduce credibility so people could just dismiss it? Oh, it's just a splinter you got in the garden. So if it was too uniform, it would look like something that was specifically implanted. But because it looks like an old jagged piece of metal you'd find in the garden, people would just say, oh, well, you obviously just cut yourself doing the gardening or something. What do you guys reckon to that?
It's a good point. I think the thing is, from their point of view, it doesn't have to look perfect because it's going inside the body. It's not for any aesthetic look at this wonderful piece of technology. It's literally being shoved in the body.
Yeah.
And so, maybe they can energize a piece of metal in some way, not necessarily with microchips as we think of it, but they can just do something to a piece of metal, change its atomic structure in some way that it then becomes more alive, as some sort of sense of the word. And so therefore the beauty of it doesn't really matter at all to them because you can't see it anyway.
I'll tell you what we'll do. I'll go with Ian. Ian will extract it, then we'll go to the supermarket like they did on the put it past the checkout point for the bar.
Yeah.
Bag of crisps and bacon.
Yeah. You'll probably find that you got 20% off or something. Now, Ian, with we mentioned it in part one, and that was the Fire in the Sky film, which was the story of Travis Walton, and that's another favourite case of yours. So do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Well, the reason why I like this case is because you've got a very credible witness. You've got lots of other supporting witnesses, and it's a bit of drama to it. So we're November the 5th, 1970, and we're with a logging crew in an area called Snowflake, Arizona. So people think of Arizona as being quite a desert place, don't they? But actually, it's got some areas of pine forest, ponderosa pine, which are quite prone to the resin. They're quite prone to burning. So these guys were forest management crew, and they were always on the lookout for forest fires and things like that. And they were out one evening, and I think what they were doing was moving logs around to act as fire breaks, this sort of thing. And there were a crew of 7, of which Travis Walton was one of them. He wasn't the leader. There was another guy. And they saw this, what they thought was a fire in the sky, which they thought may have been a tree burning. So they headed towards it. And what they actually saw was a classic large flying saucer, your domed classic flying saucer, slightly tipped down in a clearing, glowing, very, very fiery glow. And they were just, they're in their truck and they just stood there open mouthed. And Travis Walton was quite young at the time. He'd have been in his sort of early 20s. And he, for some reason, he got the urge to go outside and sort of just go up to it. Everybody else said, "What are you doing?" But he just ran out. And he crouched down behind a stone, I think it was. But as he stood up, he got hit by this bolt of lightning that seemed to come out of the object and got knocked backwards, thrown backwards. And his friends thought basically that the flying saucer shot a death ray at him. And they just they just drove off in an absolute blind panic. And they got some way away before they suddenly calmed down and realized that they'd actually left one of their fellows out there in the wild. So they went back. And when they got back there, they couldn't find anything. I mean, they got back to the area. Travis wasn't there. The flying saucer had gone. So they then hightailed it into town, very agitated, claiming that what they'd seen, went to the local sheriff's office. And of course, immediately the police were very suspicious and they actually thought that they'd killed him and disposed of the body and then made up a story to sort of cover it. Although it wasn't a very good cover story, was it? Because no one would believe them. So I don't know whether they arrested the men, but they certainly interviewed the men and they actually got them to take lie detectors. And all of them passed, but for one, and who got an equivocal result because he was very nervous. So that was interesting. And there was lots of in the newspapers. And after 5 days, all of a sudden, I think Travis Walton's brother-in-law gets a call from this rather confused Travis Walton saying, "Can you pick me up in this phone box just outside town?" I'm not sure if he was naked. I think he didn't have clothes with him. But anyway, so they picked him up. And so Travis claimed that after he'd been hit by this bolt of lightning, that he woke up in a weird room that was quite dark. And he was approached by 3 small, bald, strange beings. And that he was in a lot of pain. But he reached over and picked up something. I'm not sure what it was, some long object, and started, because Travis is quite a tall guy, so much taller than these beings, and started waving this thing around the room because he was quite frightened. And the beings just backed off and disappeared. He then said that he went outside through this doorway and found himself in a sort of curving corridor. He walked along this corridor and he entered a room, which he then claims that in the room, the walls had disappeared and he could see stars. But then was approached by a human-looking guy who wore, but he was wearing what looked to be a helmet. I'm not sure whether he had a spacesuit. It appeared to be a transparent glass helmet, and he was beckoned to follow him outside. And he found that he walked through this door, and he was in what seemed to be a large hangar, where there were quite a few odd-looking craft similar to the ones that he'd seen. It was enclosed, but he wasn't sure where it was. And he was encouraged to lie down on a bed, like an examination bed. And then someone put a mask over his face. And then the next thing he knew, he woke up near this phone box. And he hadn't even realized that 5 days had passed. He had actually, when he got back, someone had pointed out that he actually had a 5-day beard growth on him. So yes, that was the story, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. Travis, interestingly enough, said that he feels that in some way, so what happened? Travis over the years has matured into, I mean, he was quite a callow youth at the time, but actually comes across as a very thoughtful, intelligent speaker now. And he says that over the years, his feeling about what happened has changed. And he actually thinks that what happened was that he was a bit stupid, but he got too close to whatever this field was around this spacecraft, and that they hadn't shot anything at him, but he'd attracted some form of acid discharge that actually had killed him, and that they had resuscitated him and repaired him. And if you look at him, he doesn't look his age. And he says that since that day, he's never really had a day's illness. And he says, if anything, he feels that whatever they did to him, they not only did they repair him, but they put him back together a bit better. And so he now goes out on the circuit, and he's quite happy to talk about this. And there are a couple of the other guys. I mean, the youngest guy was quite a kid at the time. There's also now obviously much older, and he's now come out talking about this as well. So there's a lot of people who were involved in it. So you've got everything. You've got the flying saucer. You've got the little aliens. Three, remember, always three little guys. You've got the human-looking so-called alien. You've got missing time. You've got witnesses. I mean, that's a very, very good case. So yeah, that's the Travis Walton case.
The three thing is interesting, Ian, because the three thing is also important in the paranormal world, because people often get like 3 knocks on the negative nature, 3 scratches. It's bizarre, isn't it? This three thing.
And in the Pascagoula case, which is I don't know if you've heard of the Pascagoula case.
I've heard of it.
So I mean, I think that was about 1973, a couple of years before, maybe. Mm-hmm. That was it. Parker and I can't remember the other guy, but there were
Parker and Charles Hickson. Thank you.
Yeah. So Charles Hickson was the older guy, and Calvin was the younger guy, and they were out night fishing, and then they saw this sort of dome-shaped object with a light, and then out of it came 3 very strange-looking humanoid figures, but with spikes. Carrot-looking spikes where their ears should be, in a long carrot-looking spike where its nose should be in sort of rather large claw-like long type fingers that sort of took them in and examined them with a sort of a eyeball-like scanner. And these guys are absolutely terrified. They were at the local sheriff's office, and the sheriff thought they were crazy, and but overheard them. Absolutely, he was recording them in an interview room when they're outside the room, and these guys are obviously plainly terrified. So again, it's 3, just to bring that one up.
And you've got the 3 dots as well that we've been talking about.
Oh, of course, yeah. So Philip and Ronnie, you're aware of the Charles Hickson case, because obviously, Ronnie, you illustrated the book, didn't you, for Calvin Parker?
I had some illustrations. That's right, from Calvin Parker. I was very honoured to illustrate. I think there were 5 in his second book that appear in there. Yes, he described. That's right. Dr. Ian is correct. There were 3 of them. He described them as his endearment to them is the big ugly ones. He believes they were more like robots. Certainly to him, they struck him as being mechanical, of robotic nature. The being he saw inside the ship, Calvin, Charles had the electronic eye observing him, which is right. He had the eye examining him. But Calvin was introduced to this woman, but he doesn't believe she was a woman in that sense. She was something quite different. But yes, certainly the robots were quite brutal, actually. There's also evidence to suggest that they were spiked prior to entering the ship. There was a needle of some type used to sedate them. And the interesting thing about the female, who was quite cold, with Calvin lying on the transparent couch, is